Good afternoon. We're so excited that we're in our second session of this latest Scale Up Live series, and we're talking about team building. Last week, we had Charlotte Melia, who's started from scratch and built up Dazzle and Fizz. And today I'm super excited to introduce Caroline, who has built up from everything up into Nike and corporates and back down to startups. So there's so much knowledge that we're going to be learning today. Caroline, let me hand over to you to introduce yourself and give people a whistle-stop tour of your experience and where you've got to today.
Thanks, Lucy, and happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I am Caroline Whaley, known to most people as Cal. Back in 2011, I was given the job opportunity of a lifetime, actually, where the CEO of Nike asked me to take 14 years of working in marketing and brand at Nike and apply it to solving some of the world's biggest problems. So no pressure, as you can imagine, but I spent several years thereafter with the Nike Foundation, and our focus was on the role that adolescent girls play in eradicating global poverty. And basically, if you invest in a girl, she will reinvest about 95% of what she earns back into her family, and a boy will reinvest about 35%. So if you look at the return on investment, girls are a great investment. And so that's what I spent the next few years doing, and that was on the back of many years working on the corporate side of Nike, on the commercial side of Nike. So amazing opportunity to recycle and reuse everything I'd done in a really interesting way. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit about it. I left Nike 2013, and since then, my own startup with my great friend Anna Beres-Brown, and we have built Shine for Women. And we basically work with mainly big corporates, people like Nike, funnily enough, and other organizations such as TikTok and the big banks who are trying to get more women to the top. And we work with women themselves, but we also work with the men to see how they can champion women through organizations. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. That's me.
Incredible. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's dive straight in. So you're given this incredible challenge at Nike, and how did you start to build the team? How did you decide what was going to be important? Was it about experience or skill set or attitude? What were the first things you were looking for with those founding members of that team?
It's a great question, and actually we really were starting from scratch, and lucky enough were to be funded, right? So which is unusual to go and start something up like that. And actually it was a fascinating moment in my leadership quest, because I was working with people from Nike, so I brought some people in from the commercial side of Nike, but we were in partnership with Department for International Development. So we also had civil servants in that team. So it was the most extraordinary first year of our lives, because we had people who had come only from commercial world and people who'd only worked in the public sector. So probably not my finest leadership hour, if I'm really honest, actually learning how to meld those. But just really interesting time to bring such an incredibly diverse skill set, mindset into the room. And as part of that, we were also building teams in Africa too. And what we learned very quickly is that there was no creative industry in the countries in which we were working. So we were in Rwanda, we were in Ethiopia, we were in Nigeria initially, and none of those countries had a creative industry of any description. So we ended up actually importing people and setting up our own creative industries basically in those countries. So it was challenging. It was properly challenging, but probably the most diverse and interesting group of people I've ever come across, actually.
And how, because it is something that, especially for small startups, they have that challenge as well, where you're bringing together engineers and creative people, or tech and finance, and people that haven't worked together and don't work in very different processes and have very different approaches to that. And how do you start to think about how personalities can work together and how you can create teams that will gel, even though they're very opposite.
Very different, yeah.
In
And
personalities and skills.
So much of this is trial and error. If I thought this was a perfect science, I'd be making a lot of money by now. But you bring people in and you get a sensibility about how people are going to work. But I mean, one of the joyous things that we're talking about here is true diversity, and so. What we're looking at is obviously a wide range of skill sets, but what we need to be looking at is just the dynamic between people. I mean, one of the things I always used to do, for example, is get the people to interview from right across the business, so that it wasn't just me deciding and me recruiting people like me. It was actually like, what do the scientists think? What do the civil servants think? What do the commercial people think? And in the case I was talking about before, and you start to see how it plays out. And there are certain values for me, or certain qualities to me, that just over and over and over again worked. And that's things like curiosity. If people are genuinely curious, and genuinely non-judgmental, then so much magic can happen from a team that's like that. So I think those are the kind of things. Obviously, we need certain skill sets. That's a given, and everybody's skill sets that they need will be different. But finding some of those really basic values about people can be the make or break. It's when the scientists love the creatives and the creatives love the finance people, and you start to create something really magical then.
I think curiosity is one of the best words, and particularly in the creative and marketing world, I think that does help to gel a team. But for a marketeer, we need to be curious about the audience that we're targeting and the problems that they have and the behaviors that they have.
Absolutely.
And people that are curious never just think they know the answer.
That's
They'll
right.
always be looking to learn more. And that's where you get really interesting and useful marketeer.
It is. You get the best work as well, right? Because curiosity creates great work and it creates great teams. So it's a winner actually.
And also just from working with other teams and other skill sets, if you're curious, then you can see how you'll be curious about how you can work cross-functionally. So something we did at Yacht, for example, was make sure that we had teams working across everything. So we'd have an engineer working with UX, working with a marketer and customer service. So they were all looking to solve a problem with the different skill sets. And they needed that curiosity to work out, okay, but how would my idea of what I want to do fit with what you could do as an engineer or you could do from a customer service point of view? And then that created the magic that meant they worked together, because they could then forge great relationships through finding solutions together.
Absolutely. People love it, because generally what's happening, if people are curious, they're also building on each other's ideas, because they're not putting things down. They're not shutting things down quickly. There's like, wow, that's interesting. I never thought about that. So what then? And you just get these lovely builds. And the word you use there is magic is absolutely right, because it is like magic. And that's why it's kind of difficult to explain exactly how you build a team and a dynamic of teams, but those certain little bits of secret sauce will go a long way. They go a long way.
Yeah. From a functional point of view, I'm not a big fan of having too many interviews, but I do think it's really useful that if you know that somebody is going to work really closely with another member of a team, I do think it's nice for them to at least have a coffee as part of the process, because that relationship is so important. And partly it's going to, that's they're going to achieve or not based on building those relationships. So it's good to know in advance. And I think also just from a candidate point of view, you should be confident to ask to meet those people as well. I think that, and to have that curiosity again of who else will I be working with? What will that team look like outside of my structured team? One thing that you brought up earlier as well was this hiring remotely. So this is also something that a lot of our clients and founders have to do, which is, you see an opportunity, you have product market fit in your first market, you look to then build out quickly into other markets. And it's how do you hire remotely and leanly, if you don't have a huge budget to go into a country and build an office and build a whole infrastructure around it. Are there any tips on hiring remotely, especially in places like you say that don't have that infrastructure and talent pool already set?
The way we did it, and I have to say, there was always a trip where we would go out and just meet everyone we could. So you might not be able to keep going, but you've got to go at least once. And during that time, we made contacts. We asked people to introduce us to people. So by the time we got there, we just absolutely maxed out. We'd go out we were a small team at the time, only 4, I think, and we just met as many people as possible. And you've got to work out who your allies are, because if you are working remotely like that, it's like doing keyhole surgery without a camera. Sometimes you have to have people on the ground that you can trust. And what we did is we mixed up teams, and so we found people locally who could really pave the way for us, and then we would actually bring in the talent that we just literally couldn't find. And again, that created some really lovely diversity in there. So I was worried initially about bringing creative teams in, because it felt like, we were imposing. But actually what we were doing was starting to build an industry, because they were passing on their knowledge to more junior people. And actually, by the time they'd done 2 or 3 years in that country, we'd already started to grow some people organically in the team. But you definitely have to have allies on the ground. You have to have trusted allies on the ground. And also just to navigate the local, some of it's regulations, some of it's politics. Some countries we work in, government are, very involved in what we were doing. And so you have to have people who really know the inside of that and can help you navigate some of the trickier bits of it, which there will be, or inevitably will be.
Yeah, it sounds like a minefield, doesn't it? See, and what would you have? Because obviously it is different when you mentioned the budget you had and the ability. It's very different when you're hiring with a healthy budget in a corporate and with a brand that's well known as well. Being able to attract people with the Nike Brand Foundation is a badge of honor that most people, you'd only have to say we're open and you'd have thousands of people applying, I'm sure. What learnings did you then take to starting up your own business and going back to starting from scratch? Obviously you had your own reputation, but it's how there must be some good synergies.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And actually, funny enough, when you work with some of the big brands, people like Nike, you're right in that everybody wants to work for you. So you end up with the problem of having 1,200 applications for a job, and the truth is not everybody was right. So you sort of create a problem in its own right, and then have to really get down to the people who actually could operate within that environment. So that had its own issues. But I think one of the things I've always felt really strongly about is recruiting around energy. So finding people with the right energy. So moving from working in a Nike to starting to recruit for Shine. And our first employee came in a couple of years after we started, and she was amazing. But what she brought was incredible energy and an incredible flexibility. And actually, I look back, and that's exactly what we had to have in the foundation, because we didn't really know where it was all going to go. And so that, of course, there'll be people listening to this who need a very specific skill set, and that's and that's an important thing to go out and find. But mostly when I'm working with founders, what I find is that they are just so bogged down, and mainly in admin. So it's actually, they're just up to here. And when you actually sit them down and go, how are you spending your day? What they thought they'd be doing, which is developing the product, selling the product, building those high level relationships, actually they're sorting out, they're practically clearing out the fridge, and it's actually being really clear on the fact that you can't do everything. And I've seen so many founders get utterly worn down. So there's a point in time when you go, you can't afford not to bring somebody in. And that first person that we brought in, and that the lessons I think we learned there is recruit for energy, because it's exhausting doing a startup. And so you need somebody who brings energy and somebody who's really flexible and can grow with you. So our first employee, Alice at Shine, who's a superstar, was our client director within 18 months. So she went from being admin and jack of all trades to client director, because her institutional knowledge was incredible. So she knew everything, and grew so fast with us. And so you're kind of recruiting for what people can become rather than what you desperately need today.
Yeah, and I think we notice that a lot as well, because I think energy is just so important, and finding that energy from dealing with bumps in the road and changes, and you either enjoy the fact that every week is going to be different, and they're going to be challenges, and there are going to be ups and downs and big celebrations as well as some knockbacks, and that for you is really fun and you get energized by that, or actually you're the type of personality that would prefer to know exactly what's going to happen week on week, and have your next year planned out for you, and not really deviate from that role. And that's fine, but you need to understand the difference between that if you're going to look for jobs in startups and get that energy.
You're 100% right here, because that, if you need certainty, that startup is not the place to go. But that doesn't mean to say you only need to recruit people who come from startups who've done that. Because that flexibility, that ability to deal with adversity, the constant change can come from so many different walks of life. And I think, there's a very fine balance to find between finding people who absolutely fit your values and your unique proposition, and yet bringing real diversity and interest to your team. And so actually, people who have found, lived through adversity, it could have come from traveling, it could have come from a year out, or it could have come from, something in their personal lives. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that they've fought their way through a startup before. So it's really worth looking incredibly broadly and starting that diversity journey really early on.
I think if you've ever worked in a large organization and you've persevered to really fight for a project you really believe in, and taken it to every stakeholder, and been knocked back but gone through all the hoops and got it live after a year or so of work, then that is that same perseverance of being able to go to 100 partners before you find the one that's going to take a bet on your startup. I think
you are so right.
It's so true. I'm also a massive fan. I've taken quite a few gap years, but I took one about when I was 30 as well, and took a year out in South America. And I think the opportunity to travel, especially when you're a little bit older and you've already been in the workplace for years, and to look back and really think about what's important and what drives you, is very, very very lucky to be able to do that and work at the same time. But yes, any opportunity.
And we love people who've traveled a lot, or lived in other countries. We have a team of leaders who deliver a lot of our programs, and certainly things like languages and skills, those kind of skill sets, super important to us. But we just love people who've lived abroad or have traveled a lot, because they have dealt with adversity. They've had to be flexible. They bring that curiosity, that non-judgment to the game, and can deal with things. We're putting people out there who in a room full of 40, 50 women who are, building their confidence, and things, things happen, conversations come up. So you need people who've got an incredible breadth of not just skill set, but just mindset as well, that actually helps them deal with anything that comes up.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And you can get that even from just being curious, being in London, or I mean, I was very fortunate to be able to get a job that meant that I could travel around South America for a year. But but you can do that just by being curious and going out and meeting people, and finding people that haven't come from a very similar background to you and to the rest of your team, to bring in and ask them for their ideas and include them in conversations. And I think that's where we all need to work a bit harder, I think, because I think it's much more comforting to go to a group of people that have your experience and that you can immediately relate to. And I think that it's something very important, I think, when we're looking at hiring as well.
Yeah, we're great believers in actually everyone. When we're working with our clients and our groups, we're a great believer in building out your sort of supporters network. And of course, that's some people you can laugh and cry with, but there's also what I refer to the mavericks, and the people who just sort of shake you up, who put you through the spin cycle, who don't think like you, who challenge you actually. And particularly, I found as a founder of a business, it's easy to sort of stay within our guardrails, and actually having a few people who completely throw me a loop have been incredibly helpful in stopping me getting too sort of complacent about my route, as it were.
Oh yes, it's good, isn't it? Yeah, it's so true. And how do you encourage people to challenge, especially members of your team? Because I suppose there's a difference between having an advisor or an investor that feels they can challenge the founder versus a member of the team feeling they have the opportunity or the openness within the team to challenge in a constructive way.
Yeah, and I don't underestimate that it's not always easy for the team to do that. It's something that I've had to learn as a founder, that I crave it. I mean, I grew up in a world, in a Nike environment for 17 years, where I don't think I'd get through an hour without being challenged. That was very much sort of part of our modus operandi. And I think I probably underestimated that it's not always easy to feel like you can challenge a founder, but actually I crave it. My idea of hell is to actually for everybody to say, yes, Caroline, no, Caroline, of course, Caroline. So, I mean, I think that's part of the people you do recruit. And, I'm a great believer that you recruit the best people you possibly can afford. And you also recruit people who have skill sets that you don't have. So, I grew big marketing teams in my past, but, if you looked at my marketing skills now compared to where they would have been, 15 years ago at Nike, clearly the world's moved on. So having people in the team who actually know way more than I do on so many different subjects, just makes it so much more fascinating for me. It means I keep learning too. So I think it's about being open to it. And it doesn't mean to say you can't challenge back. Some of the best discussions come from that, but encouraging it and actively encouraging it is really important. It also, I think, is a vital part of creating a really inclusive environment. Otherwise, I've never been a big fan of hierarchical environments anyway, but particularly in startups, and as you're starting to scale, you want the best voices in the room. You want to hear everybody's voices. It's not like when you're working in a big corporate and you go, well, I'll go off and see this department and that team. You're reliant on a fairly small group of people. So you absolutely have to be open to and enjoy what comes from people going, I don't get it. I don't know why you're going there, and letting go of what happened in the past as well is another biggie. We built it like this and we know it doesn't work, but maybe it does now, maybe that's changed.
I have to say that actual comment is one of the main reasons I got into startups, because I can't stand that, that, oh, we've tried it before and it didn't work. We did that. Yeah, don't try it again.
No.
It's heartbreaking. You're like, no. It was a completely different situation. You've obviously worked with a lot of athletes, and I wondered whether, obviously, being an athlete is a very different mindset, but being in a startup is a marathon, and definitely not a sprint, and it's not something you would, quick wins and, but unicorns overnight don't happen very often. So the mindset of an athlete is actually quite similar to the mindset of a startup founder. And I wondered whether there were any learnings that you gained from working with them for so long.
Yeah, I mean, they're incredibly focused, right? So, I mean, to the point of, I think one thing you've got to, what they bring in terms of mindset is extraordinary, really. But most of them know they've got a fairly short, professional career. So they will be maxing it out, and it's something you've got to be careful with. I think as a founder, if you're in this for if you're in the short term, then great, take that mindset, but be careful on that one. But if you look at what athletes do, is they train, they eat, they sleep, and I think the the resting piece of what athletes do is surprisingly big. You know, they spend a lot of time resting. And so one of the things I think that as founders and when you're scaling up a business is like this temptation just to work and work and work and work. Actually, it's really not healthy on so many levels that we know, you know, physically, mentally, anything. And so being able to keep that other side of you and stay healthy in every sense is really important. Exactly for that point about it being a marathon. Remember the first time I met Mo Farah, he was fast asleep and we had to tiptoe around him, you know. So it was just like, but that was a kind of a, you know, that is part of it. They take their rest very seriously and nutrition very seriously, all that side of it, not just for what happens on the game day.
Yeah, I do think you really notice also that the importance of, if you're coming into the working with your team, if you come in with that enthusiasm and energy because you have rested, the difference in the effect that has on the rest of the team. Whereas if you come in exhausted and frustrated because it's not going right, how quickly that spreads.
Yeah, which also makes me think as well that, you know, the other things athletes do, even, you know, lone athletes, you see, you know, Rafa Nadal out on court, you look at the size of his team. So he might be the front runner, he might be the guy on the court on the day of, but every individual athlete has an extraordinary team around them. They build out their teams. And so, you know, you always see it, right? Don't you? Post-match interviews, they're always thanking their teams. They couldn't do it without their teams around them. And I think there's a really big lesson to be learned in that, and just making sure that you surround yourself in people, in genuine allies and genuine people who support you, give you energy, bring skill sets that you might not have, etc.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. So we're coming to the end of our half hour already. I've got so many more questions. What would you think your key learnings of your career of building diverse teams, and what advice would you give to yourself if you were to go back and make your first hire again?
Yeah, it's good. You know, I was thinking about this coming into this. So I think there's a couple of things for I once had a boss at Nike who said to me, keep the people who share the vision. And I don't think I really understood what he meant to start with. But where I made mistakes is I kept people in teams because they had a particular skill set, but they didn't have the right energy and they weren't part of the future vision. And I thought I needed them. You know, because I didn't have that skill set, or I thought they were the only person that had that skill set. And, you know, 9 months, a year down the line, you've still got one person in that team who is just jarring. And I wish with hindsight I had dealt with that earlier and had more confidence in my belief that you have to build the right team of people who share your vision, who aren't just good at what they do. I think the other thing for me as well is just, you will make mistakes growing a team. You know, it's so easy to think that there's the perfect person to fit this particular job and there's a perfect team. There is never a perfect team. It is a dynamic situation, particularly if you're recruiting in the middle of, you know, which we were recruiting during COVID, so we weren't meeting people in person or remotely in different countries. It is really hard. And in fact, there's a bit of a stat that flies around that says, you know, a third of all hires you make will be wrong. And you know what? It's just all part of the learning. But trying to think that there is a perfect pattern here, it's not. It's a dynamic situation and people will come and go, and that's just fine. But make your moves fairly swiftly. Don't leave it so that you end up with people who really don't fit.
That is such awesome advice. Thank you so much. I'm gonna take those into our team building as well. But I love that. Keep the people who share the vision. I think that's it. And that goes back to that energy and curiosity and that drive you need to really scale something and bring people in when you have that belief. Caroline, thank you so much. Where should people go to find out more about Shine for Women? And
Yeah, so you will find us at shine4women.com. So the website's there. You can find me on LinkedIn under Caroline Whaley, and you'll find us on all the usual socials at Shine for Women, which I put in my name tag down here. So you will find us, and I'm Caroline at shine4women.com. If anybody wants to reach out, I'm here.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been an incredible session.
Oh, it's been a privilege. Thank you, Lucy. I really appreciated it.
Happy Valentine's Day.
And to you. Cheerio.